Whispers from the alley, a haunting mystery. The city had a way of coming alive at night, shedding the pretense of daylight and embracing the darker corners of its soul. Neon lights flickered and buzzed, casting eerie glows on the streets below, where people hurried by, eager to get to their destinations. But there was a place where the city's energy seemed to die, a narrow, unassuming alleyway tucked between two forgotten buildings. To most, it was just another part of the urban maze, a shortcut for those who didn't mind stepping over trash and dodging rats. But there were whisper stories of strange sounds and shadows that moved on their own, and the people who had lived here long enough knew better than to venture after dark. It was the sort of place that Sam had always been warned about. Growing up in the city, he'd heard the stories a million times over. His grandmother used to tell him that the alley was cursed, that spirits of the lost and damned wandered there, unable to find peace. Sam had always brushed it off as superstition, a remnant of the old world trying to cling to the new. But something about those stories always stuck with him, a persistent itch at the back of his mind. One evening, after a long day at work and a few drinks, too many, Sam found himself wandering through the city's maze-like streets. The night was cool, a gentle breeze ruffling his hair as he walked with no real destination in mind. The hum of distant traffic, the occasional honk of a car horn, and the faint strains of music from a nearby club all blended into a comforting background noise. But as Sam turned a corner, the sound seemed to die away, replaced by an unsettling quiet. He blinked, realizing he'd stumbled into the alley. It was narrower than he'd imagined, the walls on either side seeming to lean inwards, squeezing the path tight. Graffiti marked the bricks, some colorful, others faded and barely visible, like echoes of long-forgotten voices. Trash cans lined the alley, some overturned, their contents spilling out and adding to the pungent smell of decay that hung in the air. A single streetlight at the far end flickered weakly, casting a dim, uneven glow. Sam hesitated. He knew he should turn back. There were safer ways to get where he was going. But something pulled at him, a sense of morbid curiosity that he couldn't quite shake. He took a tentative step forward, his shoes scraping against the rough pavement. As he moved deeper into the alley, the city's noise faded even further, leaving only the sound of his footsteps and his own breathing. Then came the whisper. It was so faint at first that Sam thought he'd imagined it, a soft, breathy murmur that seemed to come from nowhere and everywhere all at once. He stopped, straining his ears, but the alley remained silent. He shook his head, chalking it up to the wind, or his slightly inebriated state, and kept walking. But the whisper came again, louder this time, distinct enough to make out a few words. It was like someone was speaking just behind him, close enough that he should have felt their breath on his neck. Sam spun around, his heart racing, but the alley was empty. He shone his phone's flashlight around, illuminating the walls and the ground. But there was no one there, just the faint outlines of old posters peeling from the walls and a cat that darted past, disappearing into the shadows. He laughed nervously, feeling foolish for getting spooked by nothing. But as he turned back, the whisper returned, this time louder, more insistent. It was like a chorus now, multiple voices overlapping, all speaking in low, hurried tones. Sam couldn't make out what they were saying, but the urgency was clear. They were trying to tell him something, warn him of something. He felt a chill run down his spine, a cold that seeped into his bones. He took a step back, his mind screaming at him to leave, to run. But his feet felt rooted to the ground, his curiosity battling with his fear. "Hello?" he called out, his voice echoing down the alley. The whispers paused, as if considering his presence, then resumed, louder and faster. Sam shivered, pulling his jacket tighter around himself. He glanced around, searching for the source, but saw nothing. Then his flashlight caught something, a door, partially hidden in the shadows, set into the side of one of the buildings. It was old, much older than the surrounding brickwork, with a heavy wooden frame and rusted iron hinges. The wood was splintered and warped, and the handle looked like it hadn't been touched in years. The whispers grew louder, more frantic, as if urging him towards the door. Sam hesitated, every rational part of him screaming to turn back. But the pull was too strong. He found himself moving forward, almost against his will. His hand reached out, fingers brushing the cold, rough surface of the door. The whispers surged, a cacophony of voices overlapping in a dissonant chorus. Sam took a deep breath, his heart hammering in his chest. He didn't know why he was doing this, why he felt compelled to open the door. It was like he was caught in a dream, unable to control his own actions. He grasped the handle, feeling the rust scrape against his skin, and pulled. The door creaked open, revealing nothing but darkness beyond. His flashlight flickered, casting brief, stuttering beams into the void. Sam swallowed hard, stepping inside. The air was heavy, thick with the scent of mildew, and something else, something rotten. The floor creaked under his weight, the sound echoing in the enclosed space. As he moved further in, the whispers seemed to surround him, pressing in from all sides. They were louder now, almost deafening, but still indistinct, like voices heard through water. Sam shone his flashlight around, revealing a small, cramped room. The walls were lined with old, rotting wood, and the floor was covered in debris, broken glass, scraps of paper, and the remnants of what might have once been furniture. Then he saw it, a figure, hunched in the corner, shrouded in darkness. Sam froze, his breath catching in his throat. The figure didn't move, didn't make a sound, but the whispers grew even louder, filling the room with their frantic noise. Sam took a step closer, his flashlight trembling in his hand. The figure was small, almost childlike, and as the light fell on it, Sam felt his blood run cold. It was a mannequin, its plastic skin cracked and stained, dressed in a tattered suit that looked decades out of date. Its eyes were empty sockets, and its mouth was open, frozen in a silent scream. Sam recoiled, nearly dropping his flashlight. He stumbled back, his mind racing. This wasn't right. None of this was right. He needed to get out, to leave before. The door slammed shut behind him, the sound like a gunshot in the confined space. Sam whipped around, rushing to the door and yanking on the handle. But it wouldn't budge. The whispers were all around him now, loud and angry, as if they were shouting at him. He pounded on the door, shouting for help, but the only answer was the relentless, maddening chorus. Desperation clawed at him. He turned back to the room, his flashlight beam dancing wildly. The mannequin was still there, unmoving, but something had changed. The air felt thicker, oppressive, and the shadows seemed to stretch and writhe, as if alive. Sam backed away, his breath coming in short, panicked gasps. He felt something brush against his leg and jumped, shining his light down to see rats scurrying across the floor, their beady eyes glinting in the light. Panic set in. Sam's thoughts were a jumbled mess, his instincts screaming at him to find a way out. He spotted a window high on the wall, partially boarded up, but just large enough to squeeze through. He scrambled towards it, clawing at the boards with frantic hands. The whispers were a roar. Now, a relentless tide of voices that battered at his mind. He tore at the boards, splinters digging into his fingers, but he didn't care. He needed to escape, needed to. With one final wrench, the boards gave way, and Sam pushed himself up, squeezing through the narrow gap. He tumbled out onto the cold, wet pavement of the alley, gasping for air. The whispers stopped abruptly, leaving an eerie silence in their wake. Sam lay there for a moment, staring up at the night sky, his mind struggling to process what had just happened. He stumbled to his feet, looking back at the door. It was closed, as if it had never been opened, and the alley was as quiet as ever. Sam backed away, his hands shaking, and turned to run. He didn't stop until he was back on the main street, surrounded by the familiar noise and light of the city. He glanced back once, half expecting to see the alley looming behind him. But it was gone, lost among the maze of streets. For days after, Sam couldn't shake the feeling that he was being watched. Every time he passed a dark corner or heard a faint sound, he felt his heart jump, his mind flashing back to the alley and the whispers. He tried to tell himself it was all in his head, that he'd just been drunk and spooked by an old building. But deep down, he knew there was something more, something in that alley that defied explanation. Sam never went back, and he warned anyone who would listen to stay.